Sulawesi, and also in Borneo, am I correct?
Yes.
And Sulawesi and Borneo, intensive field project to understand, to better be able to predict how these birds would fare in the face of climate change. So combine both field work and modeling. A few years ago, I happened to be bird watching in Sumatra and noticed that a tremendously high proportion of the homes there had birds, and they weren't canaries or budgies, they were wild-caught birds. And upon learning that really no one had done any work to assess what this massive bird trade was doing to the wild birds in Indonesia, I thought to myself that this is something that really needs to be studied. And fortunately, I was able to convince Bert to join us and take the lead on a project looking at the impacts of the bird trade on wild bird populations. And he's going to talk today about some of that work. I should also say that Bert will be taking on a position at the Rainforest Trust at the end of this summer, a cutting-edge NGO focused on conservation in Latin America and increasingly in Asia. In terms of avifaunas, Bert is quite rare in being trilingual, knowing the birds of North America, South America, and Southeast Asia, which makes him a particular asset to the Rainforest Trust, where he will be focusing on developing that NGO's programs in Asia. In any case, we're delighted to have you here, Bert. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, David. All right. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk about what I've been doing for the last 3 years with David, my postdoctoral work on the effects of the pet trade on Indonesian birds. So first, an overview. I will talk about the basics of the Southeast Asian wildlife trade, and then I'll get into two projects we worked on. The first is using expert opinion and market data to identify bird declines, and secondly, I'll talk about a field study of the effects of trapping on Indonesian birds. So you probably heard about trade in tiger bones and rhino horn and elephant ivory, and how unfortunately it's getting worse over time. And this is a really terrible problem that's hard to deal with, and it's received a lot of media attention. But you may not have heard about the other side of the trade. It involves thousands of individuals and species across groups. For example, here we have fish and turtles and monkeys all being sold for pets in Asia. And of course, it also involves birds. On this graph, we have on the y-axis the number of species, and on the x, their use. So you can see about 3,600 of the world's bird species are sold as pets. That's about a third of the world's species. And this blew me away. I had no idea that this was happening, because it's really neglected. Not many people work on this problem. And within Asia, Indonesia, shown here in the green box, is an obvious place to focus. It's one of the foremost countries in the trade of birds as pets. And I'm showing Sumatra and Java, where we have most of our data. And then that's the size of California on top of Sumatra, to give you an idea of the size of this place. So this is an engraving from Alfred Russel Wallace's journal of a traditional Javanese knight. And it turns out that to be a man traditionally in Java, you have to have four things: a house, transportation, a wife, and a pet bird. So this has led to a huge rate of having pet birds. 35% of households in Indonesia have a pet bird, 20% of which are caught from the wild. And Indonesia has become the biggest producer and consumer of birds in Southeast Asia. So the best place to see this trade in action is to go to a market where greater than 300 species are sold. Most of these birds are caught from the wild, and the majority are used domestically, although some are also exported. And I show a parrot from South America and a barbet from Africa and a bird of paradise from New Guinea to show the huge reach of this trade. Birds coming from all over the world being sold in Indonesia. Although the majority are caught in Indonesia. And here's a video taken by David Wilkove to give you an idea of what the markets are like. So you can see that there are a lot of birds, a lot of species, a lot of singing going on, and a lot of birds packed into small cages. And this is only a tiny section of the Jakarta market. It's a huge place. So some birds, such as these lories, that are really valuable, at least $100 a piece, are kept in their own cage or a pair in a cage. And you can see the conditions are pretty nice for these birds. But unfortunately, the majority of cases are much dirtier, with hundreds of birds being crammed into cages that are rarely cleaned, with dead birds in the bottom of the cages. Things like this owl that are referred to as cut flowers because really they're not expected to survive more than a few days. They're just something nice to have. So there's a huge animal welfare side to this, as well as the conservation issue. So why do they have birds? The main reason is pets, such as this hanging parrot. They also are selling birds for food, such as these pheasants. This is an endemic species in Sumatra. And here is a munia, which is a cheap species. These are sold for religious release. So here, Buddhists buy birds and sell them, Buddhists buy birds and release them to gain merit. And this is an interesting environmental problem because the people are coming from a good place. They want to do a good deed. They want to release this bird from captivity. But in fact, they're driving a trade in wild birds, so it causes a huge demand. 3 million birds were caught in Vietnam in 1 year just to drive this trade. And also when the birds are released, they usually die. But in some cases, if you're releasing birds from elsewhere, they can colonize and establish invasive populations. So it's a really interesting environmental problem that I want to talk more about, but I'm happy to talk later on. And a final use is for song competitions. So the bottom picture shows a white-rumped shama. And on the top, I'm going to show you a video in a second of a song competition where there are different shamas competing. And so in this situation, people buy birds, and then they enter them into tournaments to see which bird has the best song. And you can see the guys in white shirts below the cages. These are the judges, and the people behind the rail are the owners. And you can hear them hanging on their birds. So I don't know about you, but I couldn't tell one song from the other. And I don't think the judges can either. And when I was there, I was looking at the birds with my binoculars, and I found out that actually the ones that had the best behavior, where they flicked their tail the most or put their chest out the most, ended up being the winner. So it's not just the song, it's also the posture. But so this is contributing to the culture of keeping birds in Indonesia. And it's also giving a monetary incentive. So a prize bird can be sold for as much as $20,000. So how are these birds caught? The majority are caught in cages like you see on the right there. These are handmade from bamboo. There's a great tit in the bottom here. And so it's a cage with 2 compartments, and you have a decoy bird that attracts wild birds that are caught by the trapdoors in the top. Trappers also use bird lime, this substance here that's made from the sap of different rainforest trees. And so they'll take this glue-like substance and stick it on limbs in a fruiting tree to catch birds. They also use snares on the bottom left, especially for pheasants. Okay, so that's the overview, and now we'll get into our research projects. First, I'm going to talk about expert opinion and market data. So, as I said, about a third of the world's bird species are sold as pets. But we actually know very little about how this trade is affecting those species. Here are 3 birds that are on the edge of extinction because of trapping. The yellow-crested cockatoo, Volumina, and Spix's macaw. The Spix's macaw is now extinct in the wild, only surviving in captivity, primarily due to the trade. And so in species like this, it's pretty easy. They just disappear. And when a bird is completely gone, you can figure out that, yes, the trade is having an impact. But on the majority of species, we have so little information on population status that it's hard to know what's happening. I want to give an example of an ideal monitoring scheme for birds and show how we have that in the US, but unfortunately they don't exist in the tropics. So this is the breeding bird survey done in New Jersey here, and these are roadside routes that bird watchers cover each summer to count the breeding birds found there. And this is done across the continent each year since about 1960. So this gives us great information on the abundance of breeding birds across the continent. And we also, volunteer bird watchers also do a count in the winter, hardy bird watchers that go out there in the winter. And this gives us information from the winter. So we actually have a pretty good idea of what's happening with bird populations in North America, although of course there are a few problems with these approaches. But as I said, in the tropics, no such programs exist, and especially in Indonesia, there are no long-term bird monitoring programs. So one solution that's used by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature is to use habitat as a proxy. So they have a red list of threatened species, and they look at where species are found, and they look at changes in forest cover over time. And so by looking at that, they can figure out that probably birds will be threatened if most of their habitat is cleared. But this doesn't, first of all, that has a few problems that I won't get into too much. Second of all, it doesn't work that well for trapping because a lot of the trapped birds are found in farm fields or in villages near people. So we thought of it and we came up with a method of using expert opinion and market data to try to figure out how trapping is affecting lots of species. So here's an expert on the left in the market. And luckily our paper has been accepted and will come out hopefully on Friday. So keep your eyes on biological conservation or send me an email. So what we did was we interviewed experts. So based on our knowledge of the tour leaders and ornithologists working in Sumatra, we interviewed 29 experts. And we asked them to characterize the population trends of 38 bird species in Sumatra. And this included trapped species and also untrapped species. If 75% of the respondents agreed, we considered the trend to be known. And we placed the species in the following categories: stable or increasing, declining, or severely declining. If respondents added qualifiers such as rapidly declining or seriously declining, we considered the species to be severely declining. And in the end, we received useful responses from 10 ornithologists, and they had an average of 17 years experience working in Sumatra. So they've been there a long time and have quite a good idea of what's happening to the birds across Sumatra. Of the 38 species, 14 were classified as declining, 9 severely declining, and 5 declining, and 11 were classified as stable or increasing. The remainder were unknown. We found that all untraded species were stable or increasing, and we found that only 2 of the 14 declining species were restricted to old-growth forests. So this is pretty compelling evidence that deforestation is not the primary driver behind these declines that we're observing. For example, the 2 species on the right, the oriental magpie robin and the white-rumped shama, are both found in open areas such as farm fields or secondary forests, and the stark declines that we observed, or that the ornithologists observed in these species, cannot be explained by deforestation. Additionally, we found that only 2 of the 14 declining species are listed on the red list as globally imperiled, so there's quite a large under-recognition of these local declines. And 2 of the declining species are endemic to Sumatra, while 7 others have endemic subspecies. And I put it in quotes because really there's not much taxonomic work being done in this area, and they're likely to be full species. We just haven't done the studies to show that. And now I'll give a few examples of this subspecies problem. This again is the white-rumped shama. So it's found in those green areas on the map, and it's number 4 there in the figure. So it's quite widespread. Number 5 is another subspecies of the white-rumped llama. It's found in the blue circle there in Borneo. And then the bottom of number 6 is found just on this offshore island off of Borneo. And it turns out, not too surprisingly if you think about it, that there is quite a market for these different subspecies of birds. So if you're going to do a song competition, if you have a bigger llama, or a llama that sings a different song, then it's going to be likely to win that song competition. And this is quite a worry because the Marituda llama, number 6, is only found on one small island. And in fact, it's declined almost to extinction because of traffic. And so we're not sure if this is a subspecies or a species, but either way, this is a problem. Here are 2 more examples, the orange-spotted bull and the silver-eared vizia. Again, they have widespread nominants that are found pretty widely in Southeast Asia. And they have really different-looking Sumatran subspecies. Because it's a little dark, but you can still see that these are pretty different-looking birds. Again, they're preferred and they are threatened, and probably full species. Okay, so that's the expert opinion part. So now we were interested to see if we could relate market data to the declines that the ornithologists observed. Because if we are, then that'll be a very useful tool to identify species declines when we don't have much information. So we did this by collecting market price and trade volume, that's the number of birds sold, from 1987 to 2013 in markets. And we plotted on a graph that looks like this. So on the y-axis we have change in price, and on the x we have change in volume. So above the dashed line are species with increasing price, and below the dashed line are decreasing in price. To the left of the vertical line are decreasing in volume, and to the right are increasing in volume. And by placing species in these quadrants, we can generate some hypotheses about what might be happening to them. So first of all, if a species is increasing in price over time, then probably the demand is going up, and perhaps the supply is not able to keep up. So it could be in trouble. Species that are decreasing in price, you wouldn't expect to be in trouble. And with volume, it's not quite so clear from the beginning, maybe. But if something is increasing in price and decreasing in volume, then that might suggest that the demand is going up and supply is unable to keep up. So that species might really be in trouble. So these are some hypotheses that we had, and then we plotted our data on this graph. So this is the same graph. And when we plot the severely declining species, they all show up in this quadrant 1, which is decreasing in volume and increasing in price. When we plot the decreasing species, 3 out of the 4 are increasing in price. So this is not perfect. When we plot the stable or increasing, 3 out of 4 are decreasing in price. So again, the majority are showing what we would expect, but one of them's not. Then we plot the unknowns and the range of values and some polygons to help you visualize. And it turns out that the severely declining are significantly different from the stable or increasing when we use a permutational multivariate ANOVA. So these results tell us that market data are promising. We may be able to use them to find out which species could be declining. There's a clear divide between severely declining and stable or increasing. And increasing in price and decreasing in volume are probably the ones that are in the most trouble. So we wanted to look at this further by combining wild population size data with the market data to see if that also followed the patterns that we hypothesized. And we looked all around and found these sorts of data for only 2 species, the yellow-crested cockatoo and Bali myna. So as I've already said, these species have declined severely because of traffic. But what's special about them is that we have quite a lot of information on their wild population, so they've been pretty well studied. And we also have price and volume data over time. So if you plotted this information on a similar graph to before, it's up here, we're going to be going through time. And so the origin is when we have our first data, and we're going to see basically the trajectory towards extinction and how price and volume change as we follow that trajectory. So first, we plot the years for which we have price and volume data in dark blue triangles. Then we plot the years for which we have either price or volume, and the other is interpolated. Finally, we plot the years for which we interpolate both. And on top of that, we plot the wild population size. So the large circles are large populations. You can see it starts out with about 12,000 birds and goes down to about 500. So what do we see? We see that first, volume and price go up around here. So we're starting here, we go up here. First, volume and price go up. Then volume goes down, but price continues to increase to near extinction. So it's exactly what, well, it's not exactly, but it's broadly what we would expect. We also did this with the Bali myna, which unfortunately we didn't have as much data for, and also there was a manipulation of the market, which changed things a little bit. Same thing though, we have the dark blue triangles for both price and volume. And then, so it's the same thing here, but the red arrow in 1997 shows a manipulation of the market, when conservationists deliberately flooded the market with captive bred birds to try to lower the price and reduce the demand on the species in the wild. And it worked really well, so the price dropped big time by the time we had data in 2013. But before this manipulation, you can see the same pattern that we saw in our other two data sets. So first, volume and price go up together, then volume decreases as supply is unable to keep up with demand, and price continues to increase. As a final step for the market analyses, we wanted to compare the efficiency of using field surveys versus market surveys. This is based on our experience of doing field work in Indonesia. We found that to do a field survey and to characterize the population size of 107 species, it cost about $3,100. That's about $29 per species. In contrast, to go into a market, you can collect data on a similar number of species for a lot less money. So this ends up being a 30 times difference in the cost. So, of course, these surveys give us different data that are not equivalent. Field surveys give reliable, detailed information, but they're 30 times more expensive and highly localized. Whereas market monitoring gives us a less detailed proxy, but it's much cheaper and it covers broad regions. So these data can be used for different things, but market data are promising. So to summarize these projects, the trade appears to be causing declines in many species. Few of these are recognized by the IUCN to be globally threatened. Several declining species are found nowhere else, and that includes the subspecies of baby species. The market data were able to identify most of the declines that we observed. And the market data may allow us to prioritize field studies by narrowing down the list of potentially vulnerable species. So if a species turns out to, it looks like it's in trouble in the market data, we're not totally sure. But at least we can narrow down the pool and go into the field and work on these species that appear to be in trouble based on the market data. And I have to add a caveat here that expert opinion data are not perfect, and neither are the market data. So we hope that people can repeat this analysis with better data in the future. But we think it will probably work. Okay, so now on to the field study. So for the field study, it has two components. The first is looking at changes over time in South Sumatra, and the second is looking at changes over space in North Sumatra. So here again is Sumatra. First I want to talk about the South Sumatra study, where we have data from 1998 to 2011. And the idea there is to look at how bird populations change over time and to see if those changes are related to any species traits, predictor variables, to try to figure out if it's deforestation or hunting or trapping that are driving these declines. And then I'll talk about North Sumatra, where we were unable to find, first of all, any untrapped places, so we couldn't compare, an untrapped national park to a trapped national park. So we had to use remote as a proxy instead. So there are very few completely untrapped forests in Sumatra. So the idea is to use remoteness as a proxy. So we started near roads and walked into the interior, and we wanted to see if there was any change in the bird fauna as we got to more remote areas. Okay, but first South Sumatra, so the time study. So we worked in Waichanguk in Bukit Barisan Selatan National Park. This is lowland forest, mostly primary forest, but some of it's been disturbed by logging, some of it's been disturbed by fire. Wildfires are a big problem in Indonesia. They're getting worse over time as population density goes up. In this case, Bukit Barisan Selatan, 2,000 hectares of the national park burned, and it started from a hunter's campfire. Luckily, there's already been a study of the effects of this fire on the immediate effects of this fire on the avifauna at this site. Mary and Adney and colleagues did this, and the fire was in 1997, and Adney had data from 1998 to 2002. And they didn't look at the changes over time. What they did was compare burned areas to unburned areas. They found in unburned areas that there were lots of understory, forest-dwelling, insectivorous birds. In contrast, when they looked at burned areas, these birds had crashed, and that's because they're the most sensitive species to disturbance. And when they looked in burned areas, they found that open field species had colonized. So just in a couple of years after fire, grass had grown up and open field species had colonized. So this sets the context. They also found that the effects of these fires extended into adjacent forests. So it's not clear exactly what happened, but basically if you burn a chunk of forest in the middle of a big area of forest, it's going to kick out forest species that are going to go and probably compete with the adjacent species. Also, the fire was really hot. It could be felt kilometers away. So it probably had some effects that you can't see, other than just the forest being gone. So we wanted to find some data in Sumatra, and we knew of this historical record in 1998 to 02. But the great fortune that we had is that Pangyuan Hua, who is a postdoc of David's, actually did point counts in Weichongguk in 2011. So there we had it. So we had historical data and we had Pangyuan's data for the present. So the idea is to look at changes over time and see if that's related to trapping or to deforestation. And she's holding a drongo, which is the mascot of our lab. So this is the kind of data that we have, the number of point counts over time. You can see, that we have good data here and good data here, and not as many points here, but still enough, definitely, to do a look at comparison over time. These are 10-minute point counts of birds seen and heard. Pretty much the same areas were sampled each year, but we restricted this analysis to the unburned and lightly burned areas, so we weren't interested really in the heavily burned effects, and also we didn't have burned areas for the 2011 data. We use Poisson generalized linear models to look at changes in abundance over time. So these surveys turned out 152 species of birds, 66 of which had greater than 10 detections, so we were able to analyze them. 33 species increased, 11 declined, and 17 didn't change. This is an example of an increasing species, Chestnut Black. This is an understory insectivore. So in contrast to Adamy's work, you can see that this species increased significantly over time. So on the y-axis, number of birds, on the x-axis, day. So this, to us, means that the forest is recovering from the fire. So when Mary and Adamy looked at it at first, around these years, she found a lot more of these birds in unburned areas. But now things have recovered. Here's an example of a declining species. Again, the white-rumped shama, which is becoming the poster child of all of our research. You can see that it crashes, and this is very likely due to trapping. So I haven't mentioned that, but there's quite a lot of trapping that's been going on in this national park, according to the people who live in it. So we wanted to formally evaluate these hypotheses, though. So we wanted to take all of those species, all 66 species, and look at how they change and relate that to different species traits to try to figure out what's driving their increases and declines. So hunting, trapping, disturbance from fire or logging, and forest recovery are the different things we wanted to look at. So with hunting, we use body size as a predictor because larger body species tend to be depleted first by hunters. With trapping, we use market price to try to see if expensive birds declined over time. With disturbance, we looked at foraging stratum, so understory species versus canopy species, and also diet to see which ones of those change over time. And use the same variables for forest recovery. And to do this, we calculated the coefficients from those Poisson generalized linear models and used them as our response variable in this analysis. So that shows the effect over time, if the species are increasing or decreasing over time, and the strength of that effect as well. That's the response variable. And we used those different species traits that I just listed as the predictors. And we did this with a weighted regression where you use 1 over the variance as the weight, because you have a different amount of uncertainty for each of these coefficient data points. And this is what we find. So for the first variable, foraging stratum, on the y-axis we have the coefficient of that first relationship, so the coefficient of change over time. If the species is positive, that means it's increasing over time, and if it's negative, it's decreasing. You can see there's a clear effect here with understory species increasing over time compared to other groups, compared to birds that forage at all levels or birds that forage just in the canopy. So this again suggests that these sensitive understory birds are recovering after the fire. And then this is, of course, what we are most interested in, the price. There was quite an effect on the price. This is what you would expect based on the heavy trapping in the area. So again, on the y-axis we have coefficient, and on the x we have price. you can see that the most expensive species tend to be declining most rapidly. This is significant, although it's a little, not this beautiful relationship, right? We also found that diet was a significant predictor of change over time with insectivorous and also arachnid-eating birds increasing over time compared to frugivores. But we found no relationship with body size, so there's no clear impact of hunting based on this analysis. So to summarize those results, on the left we have species that are increasing. We have species that are ground-dwelling and understory species and insectivores. They all tended to increase. On the right we have declining species. These are expensive birds in the trade and also canopy-dwelling species. Okay, on to the final chapter, changes over space. So as I said here, we had no historical data, and we also had no untrapped areas. So it was impossible to do a trapped and untrapped comparison. So we used remoteness as a proxy to see if we could get into a place that didn't have much trapping or hunting, or that could be not so affected by deforestation. So again, we use the same hypotheses: hunting, trapping, and deforestation. This was done in foothill and montane forest, in contrast to the lowland forest from the previous study. We did a similar method to 5-minute point counts of all the birds heard and seen, and we used occupancy modeling to account for imperfect detection. So you'll see that I'm presenting presence, absence, and not abundance in this case. So we were working in North Sumatra, and here we are in our study area. So the dark green colors show forest, light green and brown and white show unforested areas, and the orange lines show roads. And here you can see our sampling points in yellow, blue, and red. The yellow and blue points were sampled up to 3 times. And you can see we have quite a range from points that are near the road to interior points. We had 267 points and sampled up to 5 kilometers away from the road. We found 107 species, 29 of which had sufficient data to analyze. In that analysis, we found that 3 species were significantly more common near roads, 9 species were more common away from roads, and 17 species showed no effect. So here's an example of a species that is more common away from the road. You can see, again, its presence and absence on the y-axis. This is a chestnut black thrush, which is heavily traded. And here we show species that are more common near roads, the yellow-bellied warbler. So there have been a lot of studies of the effects of deforestation on birds, and that was not the intention of our study. It's not that we sampled farms along roads or something and then forests far away from roads. We deliberately entered forests near roads before we started our surveys. And the forests looked fine to us. They looked perfectly equivalent to the forests that were 5 kilometers away from the road. But here you have this effect. You have an edgy species like the yellow-bellied warbler that really prefers that forest, even if it's, it looks fine, but still, maybe a kilometer from the road, but they're still there. So that was interesting. The birds know more than we do. And for the second step of this, we did exactly the same thing. We used the coefficient from the first step as our response variable, and we used the species traits as the predictors. And again, we used a weighted regression because we have coefficients as a response variable. But in this case, we found no significant effects. So the null model is top ranked. But you can see an intriguing result here with the ASU weight of price being very similar to null. These models are pretty much indistinguishable. So there is a very weak effect, non-significant effect of price, and this is what it looks like. So you can see that there's a suggestion that the more expensive species are found far from the road, which is what we would predict. And in fact, these 3 are traded species that are quite expensive, and these were significantly more common away from the road. And these three species, as I pointed out a second ago, are edgy species that are more common near roads. So in this case, we have a few ways to explain what we found. First of all, we have a small sample size, so it's possible that we're just unable to pull apart these different effects. But I think more likely is the fact that the trappers are really good at their job. Some of them are like longliners. Some of them will go and spend a month in the forest. So 5 kilometers is probably not much for them. It was a 2-day hike for us, but probably they're getting there and tracking these birds out, even 5 kilometers from the road. So it's really difficult to try to figure out the effects of this. Okay, for an overall summary. So first I'll talk about the market and expert opinion study. So we think the urgency of trapping and the lack of data necessitate creative approaches, such as using expert opinion and market data to try to figure out what's happening. Because we have these species that are going extinct without us doing anything. Secondly, expert opinion suggests that many species are declining from trading Sumatra, very few of which are recognized by scientists. Changes in market price and trade volume, we're able to identify most of the decline, so there's a promise in using the market data. For the field studies, trapping is contributing to declines of several species in South Sumatra, but there is very weak evidence for trapping effects in North Sumatra, probably because the trappers are able to get into remote areas. So I have a lot of people to thank. I'd like to thank David Wilco especially for coming up with this idea and supporting us all the way along, and all of my co-authors, field assistants, and the ornithologists who gave us the data, the experts, and especially funding from High Meadows. And of course, the Drungos and all the other folks who have given really helpful comments along the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bert. We do have time for some questions, if folks have questions.
I was just wondering, I think it was like the second to last time we talked about, you were noticed relationship with birds that eat fruit versus insectivores. I was wondering if you knew what the mechanism might be between the relationships you found with those.
Sure, yeah, so basically the frugivores are not changing, right, that much, I guess, whereas the invertebrates are increasing. And we think, we're not sure, but we think that's because of this effect where you have the insectivores being most sensitive to disturbance. So when you cut a forest, it's often the understory insectivores are the first ones to go, and the frugivores tend to be more resilient. But it varies, it depends on where you are in the tropics.
You and I, both of you, I work with the Karmapa. You want to tell that story, and then where do I go from there?
Sure. So we met with the Karmapa, who may be the next Dalai Lama, and we talked about religious release. And he was really interested in what we had to say, and he was hoping that we could make religious release more environmentally friendly by either catching or releasing tree sparrows, for example, which are not going to go extinct in the wild, and if they do establish a population, it's not going to be such a big deal. And also work with the trappers to hopefully make the conditions more humane for the birds. He was against banning the practice completely. We hope to make it better instead. And we had the contact of the staff member. We've emailed the staff member a couple of times with him to hopefully work something out, but we haven't heard back from him yet. But we're going to at least write a paper to come up with some best practices, basically, to make it, reduce the impacts of religious release.
Do people want to own a black sparrow when they got one of those pretty things?
They don't care. For release, they want the cheapest one possible. So a tree sparrow or a pigeon would be fine, I think.
Just broadening that management issue out a bit, what do you think are the most appropriate management actions? Is this idea of flooding the market, is that viable in many cases, or is that a highly specific thing?
I think
what
that's
else did you do?
highly specific. We have a postdoc working on the solutions. He's working on the social drivers of keeping birds. Probably the way forward is to increase enforcement, which we've been trying to do for a long time, and also to make it more palatable to have a captive bred bird. So trying to get the price down of captive bred birds and trying to figure out why people buy wild caught birds and how we can encourage them to switch to captive bred.
So I'm curious, do you think that there is more likely for a lot of these bird species that the price just keeps going up and up and up, so that the incentive is to capture the very last one of them and actually drive real extinction, or do you have a case where it goes more towards a case of commercial extinction, where they get so few in number that eventually it's just the effort isn't worth it anymore to try? Or is that not how the system?
Yeah, we don't really have data on that. I mean, in those three that I showed you, clearly they're declining to near extinction. But often they're using general trapping methods. So like the bird line, when they put it into a tree, they catch whatever they can. And so there's this issue of bycatch. So if you're catching, you're going out there and catching whatever you can catch, you're going to still every now and then catch one of the rare ones. But also, they become so valuable that if you're using a decoy bird, you can still target every last one. And while you're at it, catch some others on the side. Did you have an idea?
Yeah, I think it really could just continue spiraling downward and knock off local population after local population.
Your first point seemed to say that you think markets could be a really promising way forward. Having the market data could be a really promising way forward to determining some probabilities of declining species in the absence of forest loss. But I'm curious how much market data would be, how useful that data would be without the ability to take into account the stuff that doesn't make it to the market in transit from just being captured. Isn't that highly variable by species about the number of species that are being caught in the wild and then the number of individuals that then make it to the marketplace?
Yeah, that could be a factor in the change in volume for sure. But we have 300 species being sold to Sumatra. I think most of them, at least a few of them, are making it to the market. They're all dying in rail, they're all dying in the market, but I don't know of any that are particularly sensitive that couldn't make the car trip necessarily. Yeah. But that's an interesting idea, especially with the volume in the market, because if you have differential mortality, which we have some data on now in the market, that could really affect the market.
But it would be a constant within the species. That is, unless they suddenly discovered a way to transport and catch it, that results in more mortality. You would still get the market signal. That is, if they were draining the populations, we would expect the price to go up and eventually the sales value to go down. So that's sort of all noise in the background that would prevent you from using the market data to calculate what the real wild population is, but it would still give you, I think, a signal that the bird was in trouble.
So I can just imagine that some of the more common species, you could catch a ton of them from all in a cage to transport, and then because of the overcrowding conditions and disease spread or whatever, you lose a bunch of those, whereas the rare species you catch only one or two. So you end up in the marketplace, and those ones have a greater chance of survival en route. Therefore, you get two of each, the common one and the rare one, but the decline has been a lot greater than the common one. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's true.
Josh?
How many of the 300 species that are traded are also threatened by deforestation? And are any of the ones that are most threatened by trade also particularly threatened by deforestation?
It seems to be an opposite relationship between trade and deforestation as far as threat. Of the 300, I don't know how many are threatened by deforestation.
Why is it not? Why are they not matching?
They're not matching because trappers go for the birds that are close to home. So the first ones to be caught out are the ones that live around the houses. So Oriental magpie robin is still really common in somewhere like Singapore, but in Sumatra they're gone because it's like catching a Carolina wren or a robin here. So the deep forest birds that are threatened by deforestation are not necessarily, or probably not the ones that are trapped so much.
Are the deeper forest birds also more difficult to catch because they're more shy or wary or something like that?
Potentially, but the Sumatran laughing thrush, which is a primary forest obligate, is really easy to catch. They grow about in big groups, and once you catch one, the entire group will go into the cage. So yeah. Yeah, Rachel.
I was curious what the reasoning of the Buddhist leader you talked to was with regards to why they didn't feel that the practice in and of itself was, something that should be stopped. And if there's anything you think that could happen in terms of bringing in intermediaries, or probably you already did, but it just seems so surprising given Buddhist philosophy that they.
Well, my first question to him was, how important is the practice?
Uh-huh.
And he said it's not critical, but it is important. And so it is, it started out as a Chinese tradition. From the little that I know about it, it wasn't really in the old Buddhist text. It started out as a Chinese cultural tradition.
Yeah.
But now it's become a part of Buddhism. And he's reluctant to eliminate it completely. And maybe if we try this and it really doesn't work and we come back to him in 5 years, 10 years and say, it's still a huge issue, you're killing all these birds,
Yeah,
because they don't want to do that. I mean, that's the opposite of what they want to do. So, yeah.
I wonder if there's any cultural practice. God, I mean, this is just out there. But is there anything that could supplant it that's actually beneficial for species?
So David suggested donating to the World Wildlife Fund.
Yeah, right.
Getting married. He was not impressed with that idea.
Yeah.
Anything else? Bert, thank you so much. This was really nice.
I guess now I think of it, actually, these birds are really cheap. They're not going to be any good.